Gary Chapman, so excited to talk to you.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to talk with you.
Yeah, I am so excited. I feel like, well, number one, you and I were chatting before we got started here, and I want to take a moment just to acknowledge and appreciate your work. You have made, I know, such a difference in the lives of men that do life with us. Me personally, your book saved my marriage. I was going about loving my wife the wrong way. I was loving her in my love language and not hers, of course. Biggest mistake, right?
Yep.
But your work, seriously, absolutely game changing. And I'm a huge fan. I've been a huge fan of yours for a long time.
Well, thank you, Larry. It's great to be with you. I've been super, super encouraged with the way that book has helped so many couples, not only in this country, but around the world. And the book's been translated now in over 50 languages, which just absolutely blows my mind.
Yeah.
But it's great to see how couples have learned to connect with each other emotionally. So, yeah, I'm just humbled and excited.
Yeah. And, I know we're going to talk about your new book today, but I would just love to. I just had Dr. Meg Meeker on for the third time. And one of the questions I had for her, and I was so pleased to hear the response was, and I'll pose the same question to you. So when you were putting together, the 5 love languages, did you ever think that it would be what it is today?
No. I did know that the idea, the concept, would change marriages because I had discovered it in my counseling with couples, and I had seen it change marriages, and it enhanced my own marriage once I discovered it. So I knew the idea would be really, really, really helpful, but I had no idea that it would sell over 13 million copies now in English and be translated and published all over the world. No idea. My curiosity wheels are rolling here. I just have to sit here and think, like, how many marriages has that book saved? It's probably countless marriages. And the cool thing I love about that book, Gary, is the simplicity. Yeah.
And because, men are super simple creatures, and the simplicity of that book is just like, it's simple. I can do this. Got it.
Yeah. Well, I'm a simple person. Okay. And I write, I think it was D.L. Moody who said, keep the cookies on the bottom shelf so everybody can get to them. So I try not to use a lot of psychological words and all that kind of stuff. I just try to write for those of us who are just common people. And, I figure anybody who's super intelligent, they'll get it too.
Right. That's right. I'm gonna steal that quote. Keep the cookies on the bottom shelf. So we're going to talk about 5 simple ways to strengthen your marriage. Your newest book coming out. One quick question though, I've always been dying to ask you as a kid growing up. I don't know what your family experience was or what your childhood experience was, but what you do today, you're so passionate about it. Did this all start when you were young as a child? Like just this passion to help people, ministry, marriage, love, connection, all that? Or was this something that maybe took you by surprise later in life?
Well, it grew. In high school, I was deeply involved in our youth group in our church. And by the time I finished high school, I really sensed that God wanted me to do something full-time with my life. And I only knew there was 2 things you could do. You could be a missionary or you could be a pastor. I didn't know there was anything else. And I didn't like snakes. So I figured, I guess I should stay out of the jungle. I'll just be a pastor. But, eventually, Larry, when I got in the pastorate, and I'm an associate pastor of a church. I'm not the preaching pastor. But what I found is where people are really hurting is marriage and family. Mm-hmm. And I kind of got pushed into counseling. I mean, I didn't train to be a counselor. I took all the counseling courses that were offered in those days in seminary. But I didn't anticipate, being a counselor. But as it turned out, I spent, so many hours every week for years counseling people. And so I kind of got pushed into it and kind of learned as I went. And then all of my writing really has been an overflow of that.
Yeah, again, going back to just the simplicity and how many hours do you think in your lifetime you've stood, nose to nose, toes to toes with couples and helping them through their marital problems?
I have no idea how many hours, but I know that for years I was seeing over 20 couples a week.
Wow.
Which is a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And what I had to learn, Larry, is how to give people my full attention when I was with them, but when they walked out the door, release them to God. Because in the early days, I would take their problems internally, and I'd go home at night with all these pain in my heart and my mind, and it wasn't good for my marriage. Not good for anybody's marriage. Every counselor has to learn that, how to release the people and not carry their burden through it, because it's not helping them for me to have all the pain and hurt inside of me. But so once I learned that, then I could do that week by week.
That had to be a super powerful lesson, because if you're always taking on the problems and issues of others, it's very hard for that to not. Like you said, it's almost like you're packing things in your backpack all day long, and then you bring them home and you're exhausted and right.
Yeah, absolutely.
What have you found? Just going back again to 5 love languages. What have you found has been the most problematic area for couples to get over? Or maybe not even most problematic, but just the most common?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is if you discover that your spouse's love language is something that you did not receive as a child.
Oh.
If you didn't get touched, for example, your parents never hugged you, then by nature, you're not a toucher. Or if you didn't receive words of affirmation growing up, and you marry someone and find out their language is words of affirmation, it's hard because you've never said those words. That's why I say to a guy, get you a sheet of paper or maybe a notebook and just write down sentences that maybe you've heard other people say and write them down, stand in front of the mirror, read them out loud until you feel comfortable enough that you could say one of them. Walk in the room where she is and say it, and then run. And you broke the silence. Next time will be easier.
Oh, man, I love that.
That's the biggest challenge, yeah.
I feel like you just took a peek at my own marriage. My wife and I, I've known her for 24 years. We've been married for 17. And my 2 love languages, I'm sure. I by the way, side question here. I would love to know the statistics of men who words of affirmation and physical touch is their primary ones, because I see that all the time. But with mine, my wife grew up in a fantastic home. Like my in-laws have been married for, I think, 44 years, just most genuine, amazing people on the planet, and will just love all over you. But one thing that they never really did with my wife and then her other 2 siblings was compliment. It just wasn't a thing that they did, and they didn't do it out of spite or being mean. They just didn't give a whole lot of compliments.
Yeah.
And me, I compliment my wife all the time just because that's my love language anyway. So I'm always complimenting her because I default to that. And every now and again, I'll ask my wife, I'm like, she'll say something like, "Oh, you look really good today." I was like, "Oh, thanks." I was like, "I know when you say it, you really mean it, because I hardly ever hear it."
Oh, yeah. If you didn't get it coming up, it's not natural for you to speak that language. And that's why we have to consciously think, that what my love language means to me means the same thing to them. So I'm not going to speak my language. I'm going to speak their language. It's going to touch their heart. It's a learning process. But the good news is we can learn to speak any of these languages, even if we didn't receive them as a child. We can learn to speak them.
Yeah, creating new skills, right? That's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
So we're facing times that we've never faced before. And I think this new book that you have out, 5 Simple Ways to Strengthen Your Marriage when you're stuck at home together. I saw the cover of this book and I was like, oh, this is beautiful. Because you're right. I mean, we're in times we've really never been as a society. I mean, we had the pandemic back in, I think it was 1920. But, society is different than what it was a year ago.
Yep. You're absolutely right. And when you're thrown together, your whole world is different.
Yeah.
Everything's changed. And adapting to that can create stress. And stress brings out the worst in us.
Right. So what are some strategies? I mean, especially because you're right. What we're seeing right now in the home front is stress is high. People are concerned about their finances. People are concerned about employment. They just want to get out as a family, have their family vacations. They want to do things together, activities. We're really restricted on what we can do, who we can be around, not to mention just the overall everything going on in the world right now, not just COVID, but what just happened with George Floyd and just all these things that are just pressing on us a bit. And most people in their homes, they're taking the stress out probably on their spouses and wives and husbands and kids. So how can what are some strategies that are in this book that will allow us to maybe unpack some of that stress and get back to loving each other intentionally?
Yeah. Well, obviously, a lot depends on where the marriage was before all of this happened.
Right.
If you had a fairly healthy marriage and you were speaking each other's love language and you felt loved, you're probably doing okay. You're learning how to live in this new world. But if the marriage was already kind of fractured and you were, just kind of roommates living together and trying to be civil, but you weren't really close, then it's the worst in you is coming out. What was in the tide is now coming out. And so one of the things I talk about in the book up front, if you're in that kind of marriage, is what if we just call a truce with throwing verbal bombs at each other? Because when we're under stress, we often throw bombs at each other. I had a lady just a week or two ago. She said, "Gary, my husband called me lazy because I didn't put a new plastic in the trash can when I took the trash out."
Sounds legitimate. I mean,
yeah. The guys are saying, "Well, why didn't she do it?" But that was like a bomb. And when you throw a verbal bomb, it bursts in the heart of your spouse. And all of us from time to time do this. Now, let's just be honest. There are times that all of us do this. So what I say is, what if we say, honey, we're both under a lot of stress. What if we just call a truce on throwing verbal bombs? And just maybe just for a week, let's try not to say anything negative, not to shoot each other, and then if we can do that for a week, let's see if we can replace verbal bombs with compliments. What if instead of a criticism, we try to give each other a compliment? And you start down that road, and whether your love language is words or not, compliments are helpful. It's a whole lot better than criticisms, okay? So you call the truce and sign that truce and really work at not throwing those bombs at each other. And somebody says, well, what if I'm willing to sign the truce, but they're not? Sign it yourself, and say, with God's help, I'm not going to throw a verbal bomb this week. And when you stop throwing bombs, sooner or later, they're going to run out of ammunition because you're not hitting them and it's going to calm them down. Mm-hmm. So one person can have a positive influence on the other person. So to me, that's a starting place if indeed the marriage was already rather troubled. But I think another thing that I discuss in the book is, what if we have a daily sit down and listen time? We usually say, let's sit down and talk. No. What we need to learn is how to sit down and listen. And so what if you say, honey, why don't we just take 15 minutes at the end of the day or somewhere during the day and just you just share with me. What I say to couples is, take this as a goal. Let's share with each other 3 things that happened in my life today and how I feel about them. Well, you say, well, we're in the house together. We see each other. Yeah, but you don't know what their thoughts are, and you don't know what they've been feeling today. So let them share with you either things that happened or thoughts that they've had today and how they're feeling. And just give them 5 minutes and let them share those things. And then you ask questions to make sure you understand. And you say, honey, I hear you. I can see what you're saying. And now you share 3 things, It's emotionally connecting with each other on a daily basis, which communicates, I care about you. I care what you're thinking. I care what you're feeling. It's just a way of bonding the two of you together in the midst of this. Just a daily sit down and listen time.
I love that, man. And I love that in comparison to let's talk, let's listen. Because I think coming in with that approach, you're probably going to be an active listener. Follow-up question I have for you on that is, and I think a lot of us men need this, is okay, we're in the let's listen to each other. How can men, well, and women too, but how can we be better active listeners in the moment?
Yeah. I've said when your wife is talking, imagine that you have elephant ears. Just get that picture. I've got elephant ears.
Mine are pretty big already, Gary.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, so are mine. Okay. You just imagine that my job right now is to listen. It's not to respond. It's not to tell her what I think. Not at the moment. Not now. I want to hear her out. I want to try to understand her thoughts and understand her feelings. And I want to listen long enough and well enough that I can honestly say to her, honey, I think I understand what you're saying. And I can see how that makes a lot of sense. It doesn't mean you agree with it necessarily, right, but I can see how that makes a lot of sense. What you're trying to do is put yourself in her shoes. Look at the world through her eyes until you can honestly say, I can see how that makes sense. Now, let me share my perspective on it. And because you've listened to her and affirmed her, she's more likely to listen to you and come to learn how to affirm you. And then we can say, if we have a difference, we can say, okay, now, honey, how do we solve the problem? And you spend your energy trying to find a solution to the problem rather than spending your energy trying to win an argument.
Mm.
I've sometimes said this, Larry, if you win an argument with your wife, she lost. It's no fun to live with a loser. So why would you create one?
Yeah.
Let's focus on solving the problem, solving the conflict, rather than winning the argument.
I think the theme I really heard from you on that one, and men are visual, right? So when you said the elephant ears, I was like, oh, that's good. Like if I can imagine myself like that, I probably would listen more attuned. Yeah. The other thing I really picked up too was tactical empathy and you said something really, really important there to where I just had Chris Voss on, who wrote the book, Never Split the Difference. He was the chief negotiator for the FBI for 25 years. And one of his big thing is tactical empathy. And he has a whole chapter in the book on tactical empathy. And he said the same thing that you did, which is just because I'm feeling what you feel and I understand where you're coming from and I'm with you, I'm in it, I'm empathetic, that doesn't mean I agree with you. Because and he would talk about, terrorists that he was negotiating with. And he's like, look, I can understand why you're upset. You believe that Americans did this, this, and this, and this. So I understand it. And that doesn't mean that we have to agree. And I think, this better than anybody. A lot of men probably get tripped up in that a little bit. Well, if I'm empathetic and I'm feeling what she's feeling, that means I agree with what she's doing.
Yeah. And we don't want to agree with her because we think she's wrong.
Right.
So that's why I say, you don't have to agree with her. What you're trying to do is to hear her thoughts and hear her feelings and communicate to her that you can understand that. You can see how she'd be hurt. Now, you wouldn't be hurt, and you think she read it the wrong way, but now you can understand how she would be hurt and how she would feel that way. And when you affirm that, rather than criticize her for having those feelings or having those thoughts, you're not her enemy anymore. You're her friend. And friends then can focus on solving the problem, whatever it is.
Not be focused on fighting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That brings me to my next question, which I think you were really starting to go there, which is, I know a part of your book is how do we practice submitting to our spouse without becoming a doormat? Yeah. So talk to us about that one.
Well, I think sometimes people think in terms that submission is a female word because the Bible says, wives, submit to your husbands. But it's not a female word. 2 verses before that, it says, submitting yourselves to one another. Submission is an attitude, and essentially it's the attitude of love. I'm here to enrich your life. And if we have that attitude toward our spouse, I'm here to enrich your life, we're not going to step on them. We're going to help them reach their perspective. And so one of the things I am saying in the book is realize that you're a team now. You've always been a team, but sometimes you haven't worked as a team. And, on an athletic, on the athletic field, every team member doesn't do the same thing, but they all have the same objective. Well, same thing's true in a marriage. We're not going to do the same thing. Your spouse is different from you. She has different talents, different abilities, different interests. But if we have the attitude toward each other, we're here to enrich each other's life. I'm here to help you become the person you want to become. And we have that attitude. It's an attitude of service. But service is, if you have that attitude, husband and wife, toward each other, you're both going to be winners because you're going to help each other accomplish the things that you believe you should be doing with your life.
Do you think most men get tripped up and confused on that one of like, well, if I submit and I'm being a servant leader, am I just allowing her to basically take advantage of me and walk all over me? And what about my needs? Do you see men get tripped up with that?
I think we do. I think all of us do. And because we have a basic need to feel loved and to feel appreciated, to feel respected. And we want that. And that's a part of who we are. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what we fail to recognize is that love stimulates love. So if I honestly am choosing to speak my wife's love language and to also apologize for my own failures, which is another thing I deal with in this book, how to tear the walls down. We all fail each other from time to time. Listen, there are no perfect husbands. One guy did raise his hand when the speaker said, "Does anyone know of a perfect husband?" He shot his hand right up. He said, "My wife's first husband." Well, my observation is if there are any perfect husbands, they are deceased. And most of them got perfect after they died, okay? and neither are there any perfect wives. But when we do fail in word or deed, we need to apologize to our spouse. And when we do those two things, apologize for our failures and seek to speak her love language, which is love, which is serving, something happens inside of her. Because just as the Bible says we love God because he first loved us, that principle is true in human relationships. Either one of you can start the process. Most of the time we sit around waiting for the other person to change. No. We choose as men to take the lead in serving her like Christ served his followers. And when we do, something happens inside of her because we're meeting her basic need. And she is drawn to the person who is meeting her basic needs.
Is this in line with, I know one of the final questions we'll go over here is how can we improve our relationship with our wives? If we're talking about just a couple in general, how can we improve the relationship when the other person doesn't want to give any effort? So yep. Gary, my question is, say we are doing these things. We're being a servant leader. We're loving them in their love language. And then perhaps the other person is, they're not even putting forth hardly any effort. What do we do in that situation?
Yeah, I think we recognize the power of influence. We've always said you cannot change your spouse. And that's true. We can't make somebody change, but we can influence our spouse. In fact, we do so every single day. Let's say, for example, you walk in the door in the afternoon, coming home from work, you go find your wife, you give her a hug, you ask her how her day has gone, and you say to her, "Honey, what could I do to help you tonight?" You've just influenced her in a positive way. On the other hand, let's say you come home, you walk in the house, you don't bother to go find her. You just go into your office, turn on the computer, and or maybe you get something to drink and sit down and watch a TV program. You've just influenced her in a negative way. We're having a negative or positive influence on our wives every single day. And if we have a positive influence on her, she's far more likely to reciprocate. Now, I do find this, Larry, sometimes people read my book on the love languages, and they'll say, "Okay, I got my wife's love language down. Now I'm going to try it." So they speak her love language for about 3 weeks, and then they say to me, "It's not working. It's not working." I say, "So let me get this straight. You're trying to manipulate your wife to love you. Is that right? You're speaking her love language, so she'll speak your love language. That's manipulation. That's not love. Whoa. Listen, make a 6-month commitment. I'm going to love this woman in her love language for 6 months. I don't care how she treats me. And you see what happens. And you apologize when you fail. You do those two things for 6 months. There are not many wives who are going to walk away from a man who's speaking her love language consistently over a long period of time and apologizing when he does wrong. I'm not going to say there's no wives that'll leave a man like that, but there are not many that would walk away from a man like that.
Oh man, I have thoroughly enjoyed this interview. This is good stuff, Gary.
Thank you, Larry.
What is, as we wrap up here, we're going to have a link in the show notes for your new book here. Again, guys, it's 5 Simple Ways to Strengthen Your Marriage When You're Stuck at Home Together. What is if you could wrap up your overall goal for this book? Someone buys the book, a couple buys the book, they take it home, they read it. What is one thing that brings you joy that someone took from it and implemented it?
My hope always is that people will take at least one idea and they will say, let's try this. And even if the spouse won't try it with you, you try it and see what happens. Just one idea. I've given 5, but if you only take one idea, then you're moving in a positive direction. And when you start moving in a positive direction, you tend to get encouraged to keep moving down that road.
That's awesome. I get the feeling that this is something, obviously it's very valuable, but is this something that when COVID hit, you're like, okay, I have some resources here and I'm going to put this together and get it to people as quickly as I can. Yep. Was this something that maybe you had like kind of in the background at some point?
No, I didn't have this book in mind at all until COVID hit. And I realized what was happening and the stress that people were under. And of course, the growing domestic violence has taken place also in this setting. And I just said, God, I've never written a book this fast, but this book needs to get out there. So really, I wrote it within, I guess, probably 4 weeks to put it all together. And then the publisher got it out really quickly. So I'm very excited about this book. I think even if people have a good marriage, these things are going to make it better. You have a troubled marriage, I talk about how to tear the wall down and how to start moving in a positive direction.
I love that. Good for you. As we wrap up here, Gary, I have to think with a man like you, there's something else maybe cooking in the lab, like maybe something else, maybe in the next couple of years that Gary Chapman's going to release. Is there anything on the horizon?
I always have books that I'm working on in the back of my mind. Okay. I'm thinking now, I've got a very, very close friend who's African-American. We've been friends since he was 16 years old. And this through the years. And we're going to write a book together about this whole racial thing.
Oh, wow. Good for you.
And what if we could just become friends? When you know people as a friend, you don't see the race thing. I mean, it's just, okay, they're black and I'm white, but we love each other. We're friends with each other. So yeah, that's we're working on that. And I wrote a book with him earlier that fathers would be interested in. It's written to young men. Excuse me. It's written to young men, approximately ages 11 to 18. And it's called Choose Greatness. 11 wise decisions that brave young men make. And we're encouraging the fathers to read this with their son. Just a wonderful discussion thing. And the idea is that if you make these 11 wise decisions as a young man, it's going to impact the rest of your life. Larry, we're losing far too many young men before they get to be 18. And we're hoping this book will get into the African American community as well as the Anglo community, and help fathers work with their sons in making wise decisions.
Mm-hmm. So I know that sounds like a phenomenal book. I mean, young men need that guidance these days, especially. Yeah. I know we started this interview with acknowledgement and appreciation for you, and I want to end it with that as well. So like I said, I've been very familiar with your work. In our community, we talk about you all the time. and ways to implement the 5 love languages. And I just want to acknowledge and appreciate you for one thing. And I always got the feeling that you were just a really good man. And the cool thing that I really get at the end of this interview is that you don't write books to write books. Like, oh, like this book sold 13 million copies. Like, hey, we write another one and see how. These things, Gary, like I get the feeling this comes from the depths of your heart and soul and care for people to give them a fighting chance. I mean, that's really the feeling that I get from you. And I just want to acknowledge that and appreciate you for that. Well,
thank you, Larry. That is my heart. You know, I didn't choose to be a counselor. I got pushed into it. But I've always kind of held my life in open hands to God and said, I just want to accomplish what you want me to accomplish. You know, we're all different. We all have different gifts. But if we can each accomplish God's plan for our lives, then we'll make the impact God intended us to have as an individual. So, yeah, that's my heart when I write, is to help people. I love that. Well, gentlemen, let's go out and pick up Gary's new book, 5 Simple Ways to Strengthen Your Marriage When You're Stuck at Home Together. Obviously, he's got a plethora of other resources as well. Gary, is there any other place that we can direct the men to connect with other resources that you have? You can always go to 5lovelanguages.com, the number 5lovelanguages.com, and it'll show all of my books. Outstanding. We'll have a link for you guys in the show notes along with other resources from Gary. For this particular show, go to gooddadproject.com/284 for this show. Gary, this has been an honor. This has been a pleasure. It's been a long time coming. I feel like a giddy fanboy that I finally get to talk to you. Well, thank you, Larry. It was good to be with you, and I appreciate what you're doing. We need things like what you're doing to help all of us become the men that we really want to be. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Gentlemen, go out, live with purpose, and live legendary. Take care.